Welcome to the Creative Industry Insight podcast, a podcast that looks at various roles in the creative world. I'm your host, Bobby. Today's guest, sound designer Johnnie Burn, joins us to talk about their work on Nope. Please be warned there are heavy spoilers in this episode. So sit back, relax, and let's join the conversation with Johnnie. Hi, Johnnie. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello.
I
Good to meet
was
you.
Nice to meet you too. I was going to make a microphone pun, but I just thought there'd be like not a great way of introducing myself.
We
Um,
can try and work back to that somewhere near the middle or end.
you know what? I've got the perfect place. Once you give a really good answer, I know exactly what I'm going to say, so I'll save it for that.
I'll watch out for it.
Yeah, so I guess we're here to talk to you today about Nope. That's just been released it's been out for a couple of months now in the US and recently in the UK. You created the sound design for the film, which I'm really excited to jump into because it's a very sensory film and you get sucked into it. It's not just the visuals that look incredible, but it's also the sound. So before I jump into my first question, I think I might go to the end with my last question. And how have you found the audience response to the film?
Well, I guess I'm really delighted that so many people have found it the magnificent spectacle of an achievement that I know that Jordan was really trying to achieve. And, I think it's an incredible film, and it's one that is such a good advertisement for getting people back into a cinema, because obviously with IMAX, but even without the IMAX, just being in a big room with a bunch of people on an enormous screen and seeing that astounding cinematography, and particularly those night shots and the ability to hear that immersive soundscape and be absorbed. And I do think it's a kind of, when I've watched it, I thought, wow, I haven't seen stuff like this before. So anyway, I think back to your question, I meandered a bit. I'm delighted. I think I see it as being received really well, certainly critically, and that I'm delighted that Jordan has scored a hit with it. And and obviously personally and slightly selfishly, I'm thrilled that people react so well to the sound, because we spent so long getting it, even in preparation, long before the shoot, discussing how we were going to achieve it. So that kind of paid off, I would say.
I saw the film in Dolby Atmos, and yeah, there's certain scenes that I'll talk later on where the soundscape and the sound design really make you want to sink into your seat, and it's just the terror or that your mind creates from the sound.
Yeah.
And I think this happens with horror as well. It's always the sound that makes it so much worse, because it's your mind creating an image rather than actually seeing the image on screen.
Yeah,
And
it's that
just
thing of the power of suggestion, isn't it? Jordan was quite keen on the idea that he could never provide an image that was as scary as the one that people could imagine in their own head. And so long as we give them the template for that with a wonderful soundscape, then you're always going to imagine something that's more personally horrific to you than anything that a film director who didn't know how you grew up would sort of would put in that place.
then also knowing how to tap into those to the audience members' thoughts, and just getting into that sort of more the horror of your mind without you realizing it, and then until it's too late when you think, oh no, I've just had that thought. Oh no, what's around the corner? What's going on? It's like, oh no. But just to go back to the beginning, how did the project come about, and what made you decide to take it on?
Where were we? We were October 2020, and an email from someone on Jordan's team whom I'd never met, and they just wanted to check that I was the guy who did the sound on a film, Under the Skin, that was directed by Jonathan Glazer, a 2012-2013 movie that used sound particularly well. And I confessed that I was the person who did the sound on that, and I think they'd done the research actually, because I spoke to the film producer of that film, who said that they'd check me out. But anyway, so I had a call from ostensibly Jordan in October 2020, and then I got sent a script, and we had a Zoom call a week later that was, yeah, I mean, for me, just sort of extraordinary. I have been a huge fan of his work. Obviously, Get Out is just such an incredible movie, and one that, you know, people like me would aspire to work on or with a director like that. And I've long wanted to work on, on a big American studio picture. So yeah, I had a call in 2020, read the script, spoke with Jordan for a bit, and then we emailed and texted over the period of a couple of months, with a bunch more Zoom calls, and I sent him various ideas for script revisions and a little smorgasbord of 10 different sound design ideas for how the monster in the film could come across, or more specifically how we would denote the presence of the alien by the absence of sound and all these kind of things. And yeah, and so I think at some point during that I was offered the job, and I totally snapped it up, because that it was either that or cleaning out the garage, and I thought, yep, I'm going to go for it. But yeah, no, I was absolutely thrilled to be invited to work on it.
Just hearing that, I think the idea of like, I'm busy. Sorry, I've got all these chores I have to do. Need to get the Halloween decorations out.
Yeah, you know,
I
there's
can't.
COVID on as well, right? I mean, I can't go out at the moment, so I've got to stay in. I've got all these box sets that I've got to work through. So it really feels, because the shoot was sort of began in June last year, but the whole of the first 6 months of the year were a long run of. I basically switched to Los Angeles time, and I would start work at about 4 p.m. and work, until 2 a.m. or something like that, and join in on all the various meetings with all the different heads of department and figuring out how we were going to shoot it, how we were going to portray the alien, and more specifically with Jordan, ideas for the actual monster sounds itself. And to the point that I had to put a soundproof door on my home studio because my children were starting to complain about all the late night monster sounds that would be giving them nightmares. That I would be saying, "Hey Jordan, what do you think of this?" At midnight.
but but well, I guess that's a great way to sort of test out on your kids what sounded
Yeah.
best, and even though they'll thank you later on when they're in therapy, and they're like, look, Dad was creating something special, we just didn't realize it. But I want to go back to as well, you in the first initial meetings and discussions, you created sounds for Jordan to listen to. Where do you even start when you create something that's just words on a page? Because is it just sort of testing the waters of what somebody is going to expect from you, or is it more of or is it just getting a feel of what foundations you can build?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that other than predominantly I always try and think like like a filmmaker who happens to be doing the sound. So rather than trying to get too excited about any particular sounds, I think it's really important to focus on what would be best for the film and how to progress the narrative and how to make something that will make the film outstanding. So I think I'm answering your question if I say I was trying to provide him with sounds that I thought were, on the one hand, totally unusual and therefore, wow, and on the other hand, incredibly narratively appropriate, sort of thing.
As a creative yourself, I guess you hear one thing and someone else hears another thing, but when it's a very genre-based film, sci-fi horror, I guess you want to start creating a certain sound language from the get-go. And I know I was reading another interview that you did with Screen Rant where one of the ideas of sound that was created is around wind, and the idea of using the wrong kind of wind, which if you talk to a non filmmaking person or an average member of audience, I think they'll kind of scoff at the idea. Just because you think wind sounds the same. It could be a bit faster if there's a lot of wind, or it's just there. I don't think you really realize it. But how do you go about creating the right kind of wind? And like, how do you go about inserting the wind into the scenes so that it is seamless?
I mean, you're right in what you say about people not, yeah, non-filmmakers. And my mother said to me, "What do you mean you do the sound on films? They sound all right to me." And so I think it's a tough one to sell anyone, but fortunately for me, sound can be incredibly manipulative, and it really is the sort of cipher for how you decode a the images that you're being given in many ways, because it's because you have so much, it's such a hot wire to the more cortisol based parts of the brain, basically. And so how do you go about it? I think we were just trying to in terms of, we would very much trying to make sure that we'd establish what is normal, and then create the wrong kind of winds by then breaking the rules of that. So you would have an environment with a particular atmosphere, and and then we would change that, or for example have a wind that has a little gust and abruptly stops in a very unnatural way, and sort of apropos of nothing, as it were, like there is nothing with nothing visual to suggest why this was happening. And we were hoping that juxtaposition would present the alien, because you'd be doing something that would basically sound wrong. And I think, so that's what we were trying to achieve, is how to, I went out and I recorded an awful lot of various different wind sounds, different speeds. I live down in Brighton, and there's the South Downs are up a couple of miles away from my house, and it's always windy up there. So you can stand in different little gullies and amongst trees and record some very different sounding things. And so to have an open plain where OJ is standing, and suddenly have a wind that at one point sounds just like the sea and quite soft and lulling, and then becomes a whistling scream, again with nothing visual to suggest what's happening, would obviously be a wrong kind of wind that suggests, particularly in a film where the audience has learnt pretty early on that the details in the sound are important, that would suggest that there's a narrative thing going on.
You set up the next question perfectly about the scream in the wind, because I think the first time you notice that is when OJ's horse has run away and OJ's gone after the horse.
Ghost.
Yeah, ghost. Thank you. And you do hear the scream of another horse in the distance. And I think we've all had a moment of like that in our lives, where it's been the dead of night, and sometimes you hear something and you think, did I hear that correctly? Because I live a kilometer from a train station, and I think sometimes in the dead of night you can hear the locomotive train and the horn.
And that's unusual, because in the day the level of background noise would not permit that, but at night there's a different environment, and suddenly it becomes an odd thing that you would hear it.
And that's kind of just made me realize as well that the bigger set pieces, other than I think like the first half of the set pieces, a lot of it happens at night, which I guess comes down to the alien itself kind of coming from being a predator and hiding, and then slowly being more comfortable in the environment around them. But just before I go on to talk about the sound of the design of the jean jacket, I kind of want to understand as well what, like, creating the sound of the landscape for the ranch, because with night and day it would be slightly different. So day, there'd be more going, as you said, the background noise. So there'll be a lot more, what is it, you'd have a lot more the machinery and other things happening in the ranch, drowning out sounds. Because you're in such a big landscape, how do you make that sound interesting to accompany the image on the screen?
I think, I think in the daytime shots there is a lot more going on, and certainly there's a lot more dialogue as well. And we did deliberately have the whole backgrounds and atmosphere louder in the daytime than it ever was at night. So when you do come to the nighttime shots, you sort of drop off a cliff volume wise, and that really makes you lean in. And Jordan he once expressed to me this feeling he had as a child outside his house once, when his parents were not there, and he was probably only 10 feet from his front door, but he was outside and it was rural, and you just feel like you're in a completely different environment. And he was like, can we achieve that somehow? So I think a lot of it is by making contrast however you can, to make it come across very differently from what you've had before. And a lot of what we were using was volume, and a lot of it was subtle things that I think our caveman brain probably picks up on. Like every nighttime shot does begin pretty much always with cicadas, but when bad stuff happens, they stop chirping, and the often the wind will drop when Jean Jacket comes close. And I think I think we're just programmed as humans to detect danger in sound more, on a fast cortex level than much quicker than we are on images. So yeah, nighttime's an easy one for making people scared, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. I just think your senses are heightened, I guess, at night because you're relying, if you can't see with your eyes, you're relying on your ears more than anything to help you if you're going for a walk somewhere. But to be that first sort of point of call if something jumps out or if you hear twigs snapping.
Yeah.
But there's also with lights, can blur your vision at the same time. So you're kind of relying on hearing that car before seeing it.
I mean, that's what one of the main things that really paid off is I spent a long time down at the actual set itself in August last year, recording sound in the day and at night. And at night, it was very obviously much quieter. The wind in the daytime was enormous because the heat would really pick up and drive an enormous howler down the valley most of the time. But at nighttime, it was really quiet, and there were a lot of animals, coyotes and owls and all sorts of stuff. And it's those kind of things that your brain wants to know. What is that? What's that wood? What's that twig snapping? What kind of an animal is that I'm that I'm hearing? But yeah, all the things that went into the night shots were things that were recorded out in Santa Clarita.
When you were yourself out there at night, because you've got a microphone and headphones on, and I'm guessing the sound is amplified. Did that ever creep you out?
Yeah, I mean, my a lot of my summer holidays and all the school holidays as a young kid, I used to go up and stay in my uncle and aunt's house in Scotland that was enormous, and it had long corridors that would be dark and unused with bedrooms that were never occupied, and it brought back all of that fear of starting to walk down a corridor and really wanting to run really fast. So yeah, totally. And when I was wearing the same headphones that you're wearing now, and as you know, the detail of them is incredible. I mean, you've got a shotgun microphone, and as you sweep it around, you can hear enormous. If there's an insect 50 feet away, you'll hear it in a massive detail, and that kind of stuff, as well as trying to pick your feet through scuffy dirts and potholes in the dark is I was super scared. I mean, there was a security guard, but but even so, I was, it's a big few miles wide film set basically that I was exploring.
No, it's just not the same with the security because they're the people who have the softest walk, so they're probably
Yeah.
the ones that creep up and scare on you when you don't realize it. I've happened to me once or twice.
Yeah, maybe the twig snaps we hear in the film are actually the security guard. Probably they are.
To go back to Jean Jacket that I mentioned earlier, and how I feel like each act, Jean Jacket's broken down. The sound of Jean Jacket's been broken down differently. So I feel like the first act creeping into the second act, he's a predator, hiding around, snooping around. I think we do. You kind of not necessarily hear him in the first few minutes of the film, but this is just a theory, so I don't know if this has been confirmed, but when Keith David is killed on screen, I feel like that was Jean Jacket there, regurgitating items out that were stuck that he couldn't digest from the hikers that went missing.
Sounds
But
like a credible theory to me.
okay, I'll take it. I'll take that. But we see in those moments that there's pure silence, but you can still hear when things are shooting from the sky at quite a fast pace. That it feels like bullets are being rained on them. But then once you get to the second act, the Jean Jacket becomes more comfortable with the environment, but also people looking at him and seeing him. And then in the third act, it's just as a peacock in full flight, don't care. I'm
Yep.
I'm I'm gonna be I'm gonna
Look at
just
me, guys.
yeah, look at me. I'm ready. This is my summer body. I'm ready. But where do you begin with creating the sound for Jean Jacket and then sort of progressively building it up and up, but then also not make it because it's a spaceship at the same time, not making it sound silly?
Again, I was lucky enough to be part of the kind of the early conversations with a guy, Professor John DeBerry, who's a fluid mechanics professor at a university in California, and he and we were all discussing how this thing may take flight, and it became pretty obvious early on, despite my enormous desire to put big whooshing noises on whenever Jean Jacket would fly overhead, particularly in Act One. It was like, no, it's a predator. It's not going to make any sound, or it wouldn't be able to have any dinner if people could tell it was coming. But so yeah, when Keith David has his unfortunate death, actually, just at that moment, there is a whistle of wind, and you do faintly hear a scream, and that's the first clue, perhaps. But I think that's more of a second viewing thing, and then. And again, when the ghost is abducted, where are we there? About 20-25 minutes in. There's really the only presence we're hearing of Jean Jacket is again is of the prey, is of the horse that's being abducted, and it's screaming. And later on, we come to realize that not only are the screams that we're hearing that could possibly have been wind, but now we're starting to understand them more as a human scream. But they are the trap victims inside Jean Jacket, and then we understand that Jean Jacket is perhaps using this sound, perhaps even mimicking and mocking us with this sound and amplifying it. We looked at how in the world of birds and how many the lyrebird and all these parrots and macaws and stuff can actually quite capably mimic sound. And so there was a lot to go on in terms of the physics and science and biology of what our monster could and couldn't do. But yeah, predominantly the quest was definitely to have a credible alien, and in that it was about having a silent stalker. And I think Jordan was very keen that if it was realistic, then it's more of an immersion because you believe it, kind of thing. I think I'm not sure if that completely answered your how did you go about it. I think because as I recall, I'm not sure, but I think when the initial script that I saw didn't have the sound of the victim screaming when when Jean Jacket came over the house, that was something that we decided upon later. And again, we were always thinking of Jean Jacket in terms of how it would disturb the environment that it was in. So the whole of that reel 5, as I know it, but the the sequence from the Duke's Claim abduction with the rainstorm, when Jean Jacket comes over the house, all of that was literally about how Jean Jacket would displace the rain and cause a waterfall that hit the house and moved on as the edge of Jean Jacket above caused the waterfall to move. And then it was only that later on, when we sort of latched onto the idea of trapped victims inside and how to hear all those things, that we realized that the presence of Jean Jacket wouldn't necessarily just be the disturbance of the environment, but also Jean Jacket was certainly as intelligent as these orcas that I was reading about, who now taunt sailing ships off the coast of Spain by bashing their rudders. And so Jean Jacket is quite capable of tormenting people by choosing to allow sound to be heard, and particularly if it's horrific sound.
That's one of the moments where you're sitting in somewhere with the Dolby Atmos speakers and just hearing the wah and just thinking, oh, it's like that shuddering of just pure terror and fear, because you know that there's nothing you can stop it. They can't do, there's anything. It just there's the characters, they can't do anything about it. It just
Yeah.
being sort of all of this stuff is being regurgitated on top of them, and it is just that sort of, I don't know, you kind of close up a little bit because it is just that awkwardness.
Yeah, I've had a few people say to me how totally nauseated or panic stricken they were. Some people have said how during that moment they wanted to leave the theatre because their anxiety was too high. Yeah, good job on the sound. And
But
all of that was done without seeing the alien. That's all the power of suggested image.
yeah, exactly. And again, just that idea of not seeing alien and just that sound kicking in. And I don't think that scene probably doesn't even last that long, but because you're in that moment of just like, wow, this is quite a lot to take in. It's yeah, it does take you out quite a lot in terms of just like, oh, it makes you shudder. And yeah, all I can say is good job.
Yeah, and all the different layers of all the voice stuff. We did have it initially more singular, and then Diana, who was the dialogue editor, she gave us this really brilliant track of people who were at times screaming as if on a roller coaster, and then at times it becoming more pain than that, and that as a sort of background within that whole thing to suggest we're not talking about a couple of people unhappy here. We're talking about a lot of people. Yeah, I think that was particularly sickening as well.
I think that kind of does. There are two other scenes that create that sound really well and makes you shudder. But I'll get onto that. I've just got another. It's more of a maybe it's a technical question. It's kind of it involved Jean Jacket as well because when Jean Jacket does appear, all the electrical equipment goes out. So the electrical sound being used. So I guess the record player or the phone or and other items, the sound gets sucked away, and all you're sort of left with is that natural sound of the environment and the wind or hearing things that you might not want to hear. What is the process of creating that sort of environment where, because it's so loud with everyday noise, that you don't want to suck creating that moment of silence, but not taking the audience out of the film?
That silence is so powerful. Any silence like that is just naturally upsetting for for people because it sounds like something's gone wrong. We even experimented with having the sound, putting in a really horribly crackly electronic distortion noise in every speaker in the Atmos, so that it sounded like the theatre itself had a malfunction, kind of thing. That the room you were viewing in, but that would have created us lots of quality control errors. but but yeah, it's weird that, isn't it? I think the main thing that's going on there is your brain filters out so much stuff all the time, and so when you are anywhere and you think that there's no sound, particularly in the way that a non-filmy person would just think they're listening to. I remember when I was at school once, the physics teacher did this experiment. He recorded the class for 5 minutes, and he mentioned that he was going to do that, and then didn't say anything else. And then after the 5 minutes, he played it back, and he asked us beforehand to say what other sounds we had heard apart from our voices. And it was incredible. There was a really loud airplane, a train, dog barking, some other kids outside, all these things that your brain just completely shut out. So I think the main thing that's going on there is you don't realize quite how noisy silence is until you hear true silence, and that is very disconcerting because it doesn't really exist in a normal world.
When I used to go camping, you would do sort of night guard work where you kind of just look after the camp whilst everybody's slept. Even then, as you said, there's no true silence. You hear pipes, you hear badgers, you hear maybe a rock tumbling down the leaves. But I think probably the only time I probably heard true silence is when you do go into like a sound booth and you have to
Yeah.
check out your hearing, and even that's quite daunting because it's just you hear the beep, but do you hear the beep?
Yeah.
Do I click too many times? Do I not click enough?
It's very
Or
strange.
yeah, it's strange, but it's just fascinating to sort of actually realize how much sound is around you naturally.
And also with that particular event in the film, once you've heard it the second time, you also associate it with, now, oh dear, the monster is nearby. So there's a double hit of horror. Your visceral experience of the silence plus the intellectual understanding of the problem.
And you're right, you just it's another moment of foreboding dread of, as you said, he's close, the monster's close by. It's like, excuse my language, shit's about to get
Yeah.
real.
we're fucked.
Yeah. There are two scenes that I really sort of want to talk about as well. Again, I think there's the two scenes that come to mind that I really want to talk about is the scene where the kids play the prank on OJ,
Yeah,
because that's another scene where it's not, it could have been a scene where it could have been full of silence, but I think you can hear a sprinkler going off in the background. And then also moments of where the kids are pranking him, turning on the lights, making a little clicking sort of sound, making a little clicking sound to sort
yeah,
of say, well, we're here, or actually we're over here. Because I can imagine when that was shot and you're looking at it in the edit, it's probably a very much a silent clip. When do you decide to start creating layers into the scene? And in terms of, I'm not sure if it was yourself who chose the clip that the kids made, or if the kids made it themselves. But what sort of choice do you go about to create? Not necessarily to create, but to specifically go for something like that rather than something a bit over the top.
yeah. I absolutely love that scene, and you're right. It was, it was filmed pretty mute, really, and there were sprinklers in shot to give a bit of sort of mist to the air, but they were certainly not, a forefront thing of the envisaged soundscape. And initially, it was Michael Abels made a really beautiful piece of horrific music that built up to the denouement of the scene. But yeah, we played with the sprinklers, and I was just aware what a really interesting rhythm they could give and how much scope there was. And I was sort of like, please, Jordan, let me try a version of this scene where it really is all just natural sound, because I think that will be a much more scary immersion, because score is telling you what to think and can be brilliantly, counterintuitive and all those things. But for something like that, where it's very in the moment, to have it as all understanding that you're hearing the real sound from the real scene, I think is a much more visceral, scary, engaging immersion, because you just feel like you're really there. So yeah, we quickly learned that the sprinklers could provide a rhythm and tension, and Brendan Feeney, one of my sound editors, did this brilliant combined quasi musical version of the sprinklers that overlaid and overlapped, imagining more than one sprinkler there. And yeah, and I just thought when seeing that first alien kind of rise up, it'd be really great to hear it make a noise, so that because when the second kid leans out the barn door, it would be brilliant to have a kind of repeat of that sound there. And yeah, and that was, my daughter was watching something on TikTok. It was a Save the Turtles thing, and there were people going and I don't know too much about it, but she was making that sound, and I was like, oh, can I record that? And I actually edited the S's out and just kept the k bit, and then kind of closed the gaps, and so it was a kind of a weird sound. And yeah, so the whole of that scene is really a sound design composition in some way. It's kind of it's very much moving towards delivering a shape and a crescendo kind of thing. And there is a brilliant bit of score at the end of it. But yeah, I don't know. I was I was really excited when I saw that and thought, wow, you've got a big old echoey barn and the opportunity to play sounds. The great thing about that clicking noise is you don't quite know what it is, and it could be a kid doing it, but equally, it could be score. I mean, who knows? And we did actually try. We got one of those voice changer sort of toy things, and we imagined that the kids would have a mask and that they were saying biddy biddy biddy, or making, but putting in something that was so obviously a human pretending to be kind of ruined the scene. So it was a great opportunity to explore ideas where we could play with sounds that were clearly borderline, I don't know what that is, and therefore allow the suspense, to persist until the end of the scene.
It's quite funny as well that an idea can come from something like TikTok, and the just the it's not even a word, it's not even a sound, it's just something that's being projected and then being able to be manipulated to then create this foreboding sound. Because I bet your daughter probably was like, oh yes, no problem, and then probably doesn't realize it's probably part of one of the scariest scenes of the film.
Yeah, yeah. No, she's proud of it now, showing it to her schoolmates.
It's like, that's me, that's me.
Yeah. stand up, take a bow halfway through the film. It's brilliant. I saw that film with an audience in Long Beach in like May or something last year, a few months before we finished, and we played it to a test audience, and it was just crazy seeing how the audience reacted. They were really on the edge of their seat, and there was like, that kind of scared laughter that people do, and woo, and I was like, wow, my goodness, this scene's actually really like it's extraordinary. I was really taken aback quite how well people were reacting to it, because when you're that close to something, you don't know what it is you're dealing with necessarily. But yeah, what a scene. Well done, Mr. Peel.
I think as well, when you say about people's reactions to it, you never know until people watch it. But then also, whilst creating art, it's the idea of putting it out there. Sometimes not, it's can be scary because you don't know what people's reactions are going to be like. But I think the whole idea of bringing it all together, and then once people sort of, and you get that reaction, I think you can kind of, dust your shoulder off a little bit to be like, yeah, we nailed that scene.
Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, we did actually, after that screening I mentioned, I did some changes to it and put in a lot more banging from the kids, and a more obviously digitized human voice and all these things, and yeah, Jordan's quite rightly said, no, take it back to the Long Beach screening version that we had, which was a more natural thing. So the reason I say that is in response to what you said. I mean, thank God, yeah, he has vision, and he really knows his audience. And you were mentioning it earlier, the rhythm of scenes and how, but he really understands. He has his finger on their pulse. He really does. I guess it comes from being a stand-up comic, but it's extraordinary quite how well he knows how to keep, how to move the rhythm of a scene, and when to deliver the moments and the beats.
I guess having that stand up, like being a stand up comic, you'll be able to perfect the timing and knowing when to hit your audience, when to sort of step off, and when to sort of just drop something to catch them off guard.
What would too much be? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think, and then knowing that, it works out well. The other scene I wanted to talk about was the Gordy scene, which let's be honest, quite horrific.
Isn't it?
I think that's the only way to describe it, and I think it. I think that's the opening scene, so I'll have to correct myself from earlier. But because you have no idea what's going on, but then the brutality kind of sets the tone for the film. Not necessarily with gore or like it is gory what happens and the idea, but I think it sets the tone with the sound of the brutality and what you as audience members are gonna create in your mind. Because it is you hear Gordy, attacking someone, you hear the animalistic sounds that Gordy's creating to the point where you think like, what is going on? What is this random scene? And then you obviously have the images accompanying it. But if you see, as an audience member, you see the blood, but then once you hear the sound, it's amplifies it even more to think like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And then once Jeb talks about the attack, like
Yeah.
it's very odd how it's juxtaposed that it's to him feels like a joke. It feels like a moment of triumph. But when you actually watch it and how he's sort of just cowering away, it's like
I
the
love that
total
aspect
opposite.
of how he's it's like he's sort of misunderstood the whole. He hasn't processed the trauma. He's I think that's one of the the meta things about he's living off the back of the spectacle of what happened to him without doing the right thing for his subconscious and processing exactly what happened that day. Hence having a glass box with an upturned shoe in it, as if that was the most important thing that happened, as opposed to just being some kind of a bad miracle kind of thing. But,
And the idea of a bad miracle is basically that event. But what's because of the brutality of the scene and the sound that's created, I've read somewhere that you use vegetables to create the sound of him peeling the skin off the actress's face, whose name escapes me.
Mary Jo, Sophie Koto for the actress, but yes.
But lots of train of thought. Sorry. But even that, it's because it's also amplified by Jeb's breathing. do you start off in the script reading through and building up the suspense and the brutality of it, or is this a discussion that's happened early on and you go from there and you're sort of left to it?
Yeah, so that scene, well, I mean, gosh, it's awful, isn't it? In watching that, it's obviously I read that script, and when I read the script, I didn't quite realize how much Jordan was going to use and Hoyt were going to use such clever camera blocking to obscure the true visual horror. And that was actually, I think that was one of the first few days of the shoot. So that was filmed in, I think, June last year. And most film directors that I've worked with don't want to see any, some don't even want to see any rushes during the shoot. But certainly they wouldn't be interested in, here's something from post-production, even though you're only a third away from the shoot. But Jordan was like, oh, can you get that to Johnny? And, show him that shot and let's put some sound on it. So when I came to Los Angeles and joined the shoot about, in July or whatever last year, we went to I got Jordan down to the mix stage at Universal for an afternoon, and we just played with that scene, like a full sort of 2 months before he'd even finished the shoot. And it really taught me an awful lot about what he was trying to achieve with the film and quite how clever it was going to be with sound. Yeah, totally. I didn't get that it was going to be so much the power of suggestion, even despite having read the script and been delighted at how many times the word sound appeared in the reading of the script and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so I learned that we were going to be very clever, and in my overexcited, enthusiastic sound designer way, I ladled on all sorts of horrific and Jordan was like, no, dude, play it cool. And we soon realized that if we took 90% of the initial rendering out and of sound that I did, and realized pretty quickly that an individual crunch or an individual specific, like you say, peeling sound is way more powerful than hearing a lot of stuff at once, because the brain's only going to paint one picture at a time. And so that was where we ended up, just having actually a very few short sounds that in themselves are well, I mean, in reality they're vegetables, but over the image of what we're watching, they become individually painting a picture of the horror that you are imagining. Yeah.
I just I think that will always be it's probably seen that if I was watching in Dolby Atmos again, it would be sort of just like maybe skip it, just because it's just like, oh, but then it's also very key to the film, so you kind of have to you stick with it. And I think the added part of the breathing of Jeb, you feel like he does when you're watching it, and
No,
it's just
totally. It becomes, as soon as you come around the corner and you cut to Dupe's perspective from under the table, and that breathing is actually, that's my daughter as doing the and it's surprising how much you can say through breathing without words, isn't it? About his mental state basically, and all the everything he's taking in. So yeah, it is. You're absolutely right. It's an awful scene, and it does work very well in Dolby Atmos. We had the breathing back unnaturally. Normally, breathing would be on the front wall, center speaker behind the screen. But for all the perspective stuff, the breathing was coming as if we were the breather, and so you'd hear it in the surrounds around the wall, and somewhat slightly with the higher frequencies of the breath coming through the ceiling speaker, and as if a reflection off the table that he was sitting under. And then Gordy is kind of over there, and it's only when towards the end of the scene that Gordy approaches us that suddenly the sound of him comes all the way around all the speakers. And yeah, so it's hideous in Atmos, that, isn't it? Yeah, sorry.
no, don't worry, it's great. Yeah, do you know what? I think it was great. I really enjoy is not the right word, but I really, very immersive and very
effective.
and yeah, that's perfect, effective, and it's done. It's its job. Just want to go to my penultimate question. I think with Michael Abel's score, there seems to be. I was reading that somebody noticed that it's sort of there's certain threat levels that in the way that he's playing it, and how it sort of intensifies from that. So you'll have as the film goes on, the score kind of gets faster and creates a higher threat level. Now, when you're doing your sound design, how do you want, do you want to make sure, like, how do you go about not making your sound design clash with the score and how they can be intertwined as one?
I think, very much that the score comes first because it's easy for me to find an alternative way around something. So if Jordan decides that a scene needs music, then I will. But everything I do with all the sound is to make sure that it is some way, a happy cousin of the score. So if the sound design has a tonality to it in a wind pitch or anything like that, then I'm going to make sure it's discordant if that's useful, or if it sounds harmonious if that's going to be useful. Then so there's a lot of work that will be done around making sure the sound design respects very much what the score is doing. And I think what was really helpful was that because I think the score does work counterintuitively in this film in quite a few instances, and I think it was really helpful that Michael came down to where we would have the meetings where he would present his work for the last few days or whatever. We would often have them actually on the mix stage at Universal. I was lucky to be there for like 3 or 4 months. And so during that process, Michael would come down maybe once or twice a week, and we'd all sit there, and essentially he was playing it to Jordan, and I would keep quiet and listen. But he would really understand. He would then be hearing my sound design work in progress, and not just on a stereo track that he got sent to, so he could listen to his thing. He was listening to it in the mixing theatre, and he'd be like, "Wow, this is pretty immersive." Yeah, so if I leave a gap where you're going to make the whole sound go silent, then that would be great. And I'd be like, yeah, man, that would be really, really, really perfect. So I would say more than in many a film that I've done, there was a huge amount of, back and forth on respect for kind of, this may be your bit that you'll want to cover, and this is what we're trying to do here. So yeah, I think it all worked incredibly well. But mostly, I would say the score has primacy, and it's up to me to make sure that I'll bend all the other sound that's reasonably easy to change around that, with the only caveat that pretty much obviously I can only do sound that is diegetic. I can only do sound that probably has come from the shot, whereas Michael could choose to play anything he wants and it's still viable score for the film.
When you're hearing that, like, because it sounds like it was all a very close collaboration with each other, and then also how frequently meeting up with one another to sort of go through it in person rather than over Zoom, because I guess you could always get lost in translation with how you're dealing with one another, or somebody could just say, "Oh, tweak that just a little bit there," and you could do it straight away, and then they can kind of take that in. The interesting point that you make as well about how the score comes first over the sound design, and how that you don't want to overshadow it, but also there is certain elements where, I don't know, both will need to come at a play at the same time, and then without overshadowing one another. But the
good thing about that is I get to do the mix at the end, where I play with all the individual elements of his score and adjust it to make, like in the run when OJ lures Jean Jacket down the main middle of the valley, and there's a lot of myself and Snacky, Brett Pierce is his name, the music editor, choosing to mute certain elements of the score in order to allow, say, for example, the horse's hooves not to clash with the percussion when you're close to the horse, or to mute the horn part of the score when we were having Jean Jacket making a similar noise, all that sort of stuff. But anyway, sorry, I kind of cut you off in a train of thought because I got excited about how much fun mixing a film is.
I'm happy to get cut off, because there's always going to be some bit of information that's going to come to light that sometimes people think of. But whilst you're mentioning about doing the final bits for the score and the sound mixing, were you ever tempted just to lower the score and put the sound design up just a little bit, just so that
I'd always do that after he's gone. There's always a few dBs adjustment. I think, I mean, Hollywood films are mixed loud anyway, right? So if I'm sitting in an enormous room at Universal, and if I'm not pumping all the speakers when there's some big action on the screen in a blockbuster movie that's going to play in IMAX and Dolby Atmos, then I'm getting something wrong. So it's probably more about just making sure something's playing loud rather than turning anything up or down, I guess. But yeah, no, I know what you mean. It's it's awfully sneaky, because also I was the sole re-recording mixer and sound designer and supervising sound editor, which normally is a role shared by 3 people. But it was because of the fact that I was on the project for a bit over a year and a half that I could do so much of the sound editing and design work up front to buy myself the time to kind of mix it later. So, but yeah, the downside of that is you've got the bloke who did the sound design capable of turning his work louder. Whereas, and I know a lot of, very sensible, far more professional than me sound designers would abdicate from mixing, perhaps solely for that reason, or at least if they are going to mix the film, they'll choose to mix the score level rather than their design works to give someone else the autonomy on, basically killing their babies, as the film phrase goes.
Yeah, well, I never heard that phrase before. But no, I think as well, if you're, because obviously you're multi-talented, that having the ability to do all of that, but then also starting earlier on, you kind of, I guess you're there every step of the way and having that as your baby and looking after it really. So just to lead to my last question, what's next for you?
So I have 2 projects on the go currently. One of them is the incredible Jonathan Glazer's follow-up to Under the Skin, which is it's rather harrowing, but it's the book Zone of Interest by Martin Amis, and it's set in Auschwitz in the war, and it's a telling of that story that he's adapted the book, and it's one that uses sound incredibly informatively throughout the narrative of the story. So it's a real, and again, as with all of Jonathan's projects, I've been involved from a very early stage in the kind of the planning of it, and there's a lot of sound recording that has had to go on alongside the actual picture shoot as a sort of adjunct to it, because there's a need for an awful lot of off-camera sound, shall I say. So that has been keeping me very busy, and also because normally I would focus on one film at a time, but COVID happened, and both Jonathan Glazer and Yorgos Lanthimos had 2 films that were going to run, on successive years, and now they're happening at the same time. So I'm also working on Mr. Yorgos Lanthimos's follow-up to The Favourite, which is called Poor Things, and it's that's another book adaptation, and it's basically Emma Stone as a sort of version of the Frankenstein story, although not Frankenstein in name. But
No,
yeah.
that sounds
so, and it's very jolly and totally not the same as the Jonathan Glazer film at all.
So just 2 polar opposites. But then again, that makes the job fun, right? You don't want to be working on the same sort of material. You want to sort of flex those muscles, but also have something fun, but then also have that dark broodiness as well.
Oh, light relief. Yeah, definitely. I think it's important. There's a long winter coming in my sound editing room.
Please, it's just the beginning of winter. The worst season, winter for me. I really dislike it.
It can be too long in this country, certainly.
It definitely feels like that. Johnny, thank you for coming in hot on the mic and answering my questions and joining me today. Nope is out on digital in the US and it is currently still in cinemas in the UK. So if you still got a chance, go see it. You won't regret it. And yeah, thank you again,
streaming
Johnny.
in home entertainment Dolby Atmos version. We mixed that too. It's very enjoyable.
I look forward to streaming in that with well, maybe I'll plug in my headphones or get a new sound system just for it.
Yeah, do it.
Thank you again.
It was great talking to you.
It was great talking to you.
Thank you for your
Johnny.
interest.
No. Thank you for joining me and taking the time to talk to me. Really appreciate it. And yeah, take care.
Thanks, man.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.